In the 1860s, Cleveland had 5 steam railroads and a growing web of streetcar lines. However, the horse-drawn streetcars left a lot to be desired in terms of speed and reliability. As local entrepreneurs began expanding their real estate developments beyond the city limits, they came up with the idea of building small suburban steam lines. In 1866, a group of businessmen, among them Elias Sims, Daniel P. Rhodes, and Ezra Nicholson, hatched a plan to develop the Rocky River Valley and mouth of the river into a public park.
After the Civil War, philanthropy became the mark of a great businessman. And in Cleveland, there were no shortage of great businessmen. Not only did they make fortunes in iron and coal and steel and shipping, but that Cleveland was the Silicon Valley of its day. The development and improvements in telegraphy happened in Cleveland. Now, Daniel P. Rhodes was one of those great men. He was so successful with his coal mines, his iron mines, and his other activities that it allowed him to retire to his farm in Ravenna. And people approached him looking for assistance in philanthropy. And he responded to that. And he decided to enlist, perhaps on his own, a group of men to develop some activity that would show their gratitude to Cleveland for the success they'd had. So Rhodes recruited, easily probably, his son-in-law, Marcus. Marcus had made a fortune in the oil industry along with Rockefeller and in the shipping industry on the Great Lakes. Ore boats used to trundle up and down between Lake Superior and Cleveland with the big words Hannah on the side of the ships, Hannah Shipping. Also, they had enlisted J.M. Coffinberry, who was an Ohioan who rose through the ranks as an attorney, finally became a judge in common pleas in Cleveland. Finally, the other really big player was Elias Sims. Elias Sims invented some form of harbor dredging that didn't result in the harbor immediately filling back in silt.
Originally, their initial scheme to reveal the park to the public was an offer made to donate the property to the city of Cleveland in January 1867. City Council, by a majority of 1 vote, ultimately refused the gift. Meanwhile, as the West Side businessmen pushed on with creating Rocky River Park, they began constructing a railroad to transport guests to it.
Running a line to that Rocky River Gorge generated a little problem for Rhodes because he owned the Woodland and West Side streetcar line, which was the line that ran to from Public Square out to about West 58th Street, now known, back then it was Bridge Street. So to avoid that conflict, they built this little line, which I think they expected to be something they had to subsidize every year. But because the property was a good location and there were farms and there was growth along Detroit Road, the line took on a dual role. It was a great weekend way to get people to the park when people had a day off, but it also became a means of getting people to and from the horse car line. And as a result, it became kind of a self-sustaining operation.
Incorporated as the Rocky River Railroad Company, the 5.5-mile line opened for service beginning on July 19, 1868. Since its opening, the railroad was widely popular with passengers, hauling over 50,000 people in its first year. Its wide and roomy passenger coaches were a stark contrast to the city's tiny and cramped streetcars. Pulling these 6 passenger cars were 3 420 steam locomotives built by the Baldwin Locomotive Works. These little steam engines were unique as their water tank was located under its boiler versus above it or on a trailing tender. As successful as the Rocky River Railroad was, the West Side businessmen wanted to extend the line into downtown Cleveland.
With time changing, the city realized that the low-level crossings of Cuyahoga River were just too much strain, ongoing strain for horse and wagon lifestyle of the time. And they made a huge investment in building a high-level bridge across the Cuyahoga Valley and the flats called the Superior Street Bridge. And when they did that, I think Rhodes and the partners thought that this would be a good time to bring the line into Cleveland and who knows, maybe diversify, whatever it would be. But they made the projection and proposals and worked with a stillborn operation called the Cleveland and Western and acquired some options for right-of-way. Line would run along what is now the Cleveland Shoreway. And as that process was ongoing, Daniel P. Rhodes passed away. So the other members of the group just did not have the will to do that political fighting that it takes to make something like that happen. And we don't know if anybody even looked at what would have been needed structurally to make the Superior Viaduct compatible with steam railways. So the line's idea of extending in Cleveland died.
6 years after the opening of the Rocky River Railroad, a similar small rail line was organized on the east side of Cleveland, known as the Lakeview and Collimer. Unlike the Rocky River Railroad, where it mainly ran through undeveloped farmland, the Lakeview and Collimer operated in a suburban area to carry commuters.
The Lakeview and Collimer was another little railroad on the east side of town that had, if you look at it, the sense of being a philanthropic proposition. But it may have also been more of a speculative real estate venture by J.D. Rockefeller and Liberty Emlyn Holden, another two great Cleveland capitalists. Everyone knows Rockefeller. Maybe people don't know Holden as much, but eventually he was both the owner of the Plain Dealer and the builder and funder of the Cleveland Art Museum. So two wildly successful men. They built this rail line from the end of the Superior streetcar line around East 79th Street and out to the little township of Euclid. Now, their motivation certainly could have been for the value that would accrue to their properties along the line, but we know certainly it would help Rockefeller in running the hotel while he still wanted to run a hotel. Even though the Lakeview and Collimer was incorporated and built in 1874, and the Panic of 1873 had thrown the U.S. into financial depression, these men went forward. It was not a financial problem for them to build this line, no matter what. They certainly probably were counting on a lot more local customers from the residential areas and small businesses along the line.
One unique aspect of the Lakeview and Collimer was that they originally used dummy steam locomotives to pull their trains. Dummies were introduced for urban areas and made less noise than regular steam engines, which spooked horses. Locomotive manufacturers accomplished this by using lower pressure condensing steam engines and disguised them to look like a passenger car. Unfortunately, as opposed to the prosperous Rocky River Railroad, the Lakeview and Collimer wasn't as financially viable.
They quickly saw that the line was not generating the revenue and the traffic that they hoped for. Of course, no freight on the line, nor they couldn't even get the mail contract, which they looked for years. They did realize that perhaps they could generate some more money. They extended a branch line along Doan Brook Creek to the Northern Ohio Fairgrounds near the Lakeshore, Michigan Southern tracks, and had good summer weekends, but those few summer weekends were nothing comparable to the Cliff House and Murch House, where every weekend there were people going out there. So slowly but surely, the finances of the line drifted down to a state where they were basically bankrupt.
Less than 2 months after the company entered receivership in June 1877, a fire destroyed all of its equipment in their Euclid roundhouse. With nothing left to run passenger trains, operations were suspended. In July 1879, the railroad was sold for $500 to George Popcorn Lewis.
he was an entrepreneur even at an early age, not on the scale of a Rockefeller, but he would motivate himself every day to get down to meet the steamship lines that docked at the foot of Superior Street, heading out to either Detroit or Buffalo or to the Lake Erie Islands. And he met those vessels, and he had bags of hot popcorn available for the riders. So he sold those popcorn bags out of a little fruit basket he carried, a big fruit basket that he carried on his around his arm. And he was a talkative guy, and people really liked him. And he got a nickname of Popcorn. People knew him as Popcorn Lewis. But he didn't rest on his popping popcorn. He got himself a law degree and then practiced law around the east side of town. Got by quite well. And over time, some of his customers paid him with stocks and bonds in the Lakeview and Collamer rather than in cash. Perhaps they were cash strapped. Perhaps they thought that, well, that fool will take this paperwork. I'll give it to him in lieu of dollars. So Popcorn slowly cornered the market on Lakeview and Collamer assets, stocks, bonds, maybe loans, who knows. But Popcorn and bankruptcy court, he had assets. He was a lawyer. He knew if you have assets, you have a standing in court. So he presented himself to the bankruptcy judge. The bankruptcy judge looked at all the creditors and other stock and bond holders and pointed at Popcorn and said, "She's all yours, pal."
Now that the Lakeview and Collamer was under Popcorn Lewis's full control, he quickly took action to revive the railroad's fortunes. One of the first items of business he undertook was finding new equipment to resume service and reorganize the company as the Cleveland, Painesville, and Ashtabula.
To continue operations, they called upon the Rocky River Railroad, who organized, must have been a massive team of horses and a wagon to load up one of the Rocky River locomotives, changed the gauge, the Rocky River Railroad being 4 feet 9.5 inches wide, and the Lakeview and Collamer being 4 foot 8.5 inches wide. They changed the gauge on the locomotive for him, and they brought that over there, and they used that for a whole year or so, while new motive power was looked for, which finally came along. But the railroad was, as we said before, it was drifting down, and he made very good decisions for himself when perhaps in 1880, as soon as the Stanley Circuit was formed, perhaps with consulting with them, perhaps not, he projected that he would send the line further on towards Ashtabula, Painesville, and the Ohio-Pennsylvania border. And he acquired easements because at that time, the Lakeshore Michigan Southern was not a popular institution along the shores of Lake Erie. Everyone wanted more trains to stop and to run faster too. So Popcorn Lewis showing up with a line that would be strictly oriented towards the local needs was a very popular man.
Despite Popcorn's efforts to reinvigorate the line's finances, the company once again began drifting downward, including now the Rocky River Railroad. Meanwhile, in 1880, a new railroad company, to become known as the Nickel Plate Road, was exploring options to route their rail line from Buffalo to Chicago. Locating the line through Cleveland presented the challenge for the company, as they were one of the last railroads to have a presence in the city.
They would have been able to get around the edge of the town, found a way across the Cuyahoga River, and probably had to try to build a branch line into Cleveland or come to some agreement with the Valley or convert the Cleveland Canton Southern to standard gauge to get into town. With two financially weak operations in the Rocky River Railroad and the Lakeview and Collamer, Cleveland, Painesville, and Ashtabula, those were really wedges they could drive into the city and certainly help with their claim of getting eminent domain to find a way through town on that way, because it's it was mostly settled. And the Rocky River had some easements further in towards town where they didn't have track. And those things all really were just immensely valuable to the nickel plate. Having the opportunity to take these little railroads and convert them into a standard gauge modern railway that looked like everything it was supposed to be. It was going to be really a corporate raider taking on the Lakeshore and Michigan Southern and giving those railroads in Buffalo and Chicago that didn't have another connection east an opportunity to get a fair rate division on their through freight. You can't beat it.
Once the nickel plate began operations in 1882, the two tiny commuter railroads quickly faded into obscurity. Ironically, commuter service from Cleveland to its west side suburbs almost saw a resurgence on the former nickel plate line in the late 1990s. In November 1997, Cleveland's Regional Transit Authority put together a demonstration run with two borrowed bi-level passenger cars from Caltrain, pulled by an Amtrak F40PH locomotive.
Cleveland needs commuter rail. It's a very positive thing, and it beats fighting the traffic going to work and coming home.
So when we talk about commuter rail in Lorain County, we're talking about a wonderful way to finally get to Cleveland, to access to jobs, to the arts, to the creative, to anything that is in Cleveland that we can't get to now. And right now we need to drive our car to a bus stop and take it into somewhere else, and it's a lot of stops for us. It's a lot different than the other counties, and that's why we need it so much in Lorain County.
The plan was ultimately derailed because then owner of the line, Norfolk Southern Railway, wouldn't sell RCA the line, and Lakewood residents living near the tracks were concerned of increased noise pollution. Whether or not commuter rail is ever reestablished in the city, the Rocky River and Lakeview and Collimer railroads are another unique footnote in Cleveland's history.